Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
Today's gospel is not meant to be heard as sort of a passive, static reading, but it's dynamic, it's moving. It starts with the idea of word. There's the word in the beginning. The word is the very essence of God, but it doesn't stop there. The word becomes flesh. It takes flesh upon itself, and as it does that, it begins to live out the essence of who God is, and it makes this present in all the world. And so this becomes a model for us in our lives. In the beginning, it starts off, in fact, we can just write that out. It starts off in the beginning. And so we can think that we're at a beginning. The beginning of 2026. And the beginning was the Word. That's where we start. The Word. The Word was the essence of God, Jesus. The word for us is who you want to be, who I want to be. I hope you have a clear idea of that in your head, who you want to be. And 2026 is the opportunity to camp out on that word. So camp out. Camp out. Here's a tent. And a fire. I need the red thing for a fire. Okay. And a bear. There's the bear. Okay, so camp out on that word. That's the idea. When Jesus took flesh upon us, lived amongst us. The literal word is he tabernacled. He set up a tent. He camped out with us. So this is where we take the word, we put flesh on it, we camp out on that word until it's a reality. We actually live it, right? So the idea is of camping out on something until we've embodied that in the world. Actually, literally put flesh on that thing. And then that's what it actually then... we live it. This becomes a model for our life. But beginning, we have a new opportunity, a word, thinking about who we are, who we want to be, where we want to go, to camp out on whatever it is that we decide is most important so that we actually live it and bring it into reality in the world around us. And so, as we come to the new year, a variety of people have ways of doing that. And so some people suggest different things. Some people suggest something like, there's one of these red pens that works better than the others. One works really well. I think it's this one. Oh yeah, this is the one. All right. So, what's this? It's obvious. What? It's a battery. Come on now. Isn't it obvious that that's a battery? That's a battery. Yeah. So come on now. So some people use a battery, and so you pick a word, something that you want to be, something you want to accomplish, and you say, okay, so like I'm at 25% on that, I'm at 50% on that, 75%, or I'm burning white hot, so I want to continue to do that in the year to come. So, whatever it may be. Some people use a battery. Some people use a fuel gauge, right? So you have empty over here, you have full over here. You think of something that's important to you, or is the fuel gauge on empty? Are you doing all right? And or are you full of gas, as in fuel to burn? And so some people will use that. Other people use circles, and so they draw like 5 levels of circles. And the idea is it's how well you're inhabiting this concept for your life. Vanessa Williams does a good job with that. And at the end of the year, she always puts up a free little learning session on how to plan for the new year that's really good. If you've never seen that, I commend it to you. And so these are all ways of measuring where we are as opposed to where we want to be. So if we have our word, it's measuring where we are, and then in opposition to where we want to be, and so then we can think about where we want to get there. So then the next thing that we need to do is that we need to think about what our word might be, who we want to be in the year to come, how we want to what we want to embody in our lives in 2026. So, we can think of how some people have done that, maybe as a guideline. Sort of the typical way most people do it is they'll start with sort of the standards. Not bad, because the standards are actually pretty good. It'll be things like physical health. It'll be things like relational health. It'll be things like your career, financial health, spiritual health, maybe something like that. That's generally, the things that people measure themselves. And that's pretty good outline. Those are all very important things. But we can maybe think of a couple others together this morning. Just try them on. One is Carl Jung. Carl Jung is widely regarded across pretty much all disciplines as one of the premier thinkers on human nature, a person of profound insight into human nature. The specifics people disagree on, right? Jungian psychology, not everybody buys that. The archetype and all those, the collective unconscious, so on and so forth. Although, like when it takes me 6 to get the Wordle, and my wife gets it in 2, I believe in the collective unconscious. I think she's tapping into all that work that I just did. But not everybody believes in that. But the general ideas that Jung espoused in relation to human nature, people see him as a person of profound insight. And so Jung said there were basically 5 categories. They're similar. We don't want this one. All right, so the first category, and this is interesting, all right, it is mental and physical health. So most people, when they're going with this category, they focus in on physical health. But Jung would say that mental health is every bit as important to that. And in our day and age, we understand that as freedom from anxiety, all this sort of stuff, or unhealthy anxiety. Some anxiety is good. And he would have included that in the larger picture. But in many ways, this would have meant a healthy intellectual life. Right? This is what he's really talking about. And what he's really talking about is being able to identify reality and bring our lives in correspondence with that rather than living delusions. Right? So mental health, which is something not many people really think about, was really important to Jung. Second, and again, this is a category not a lot of people include, but it would be perceiving beauty. Right? Whether in great art, and art can be paintings, it can be music, it can be literature, it can be all kinds of stuff, whether in great art or the world around us, that we perceive beauty. And because that lifts up the soul, it enriches the soul, it builds gratitude. And you can just think in times like these, where we're so focused on ugliness and what that does to our nature, if we would take a moment to, yes, see the ugliness, but to allow it to be at least in some measure counteracted by the beauty that's all around us, you begin to understand why he saw that as so important. And then third, like everybody else, would be relational health. Fourth would be vocational health. And we've talked about this before. I'm going to resist going down this rabbit trail today, but there's a world of difference between a vocation and a career. One is a response to a calling. The other is a means of making money, of financing a lifestyle. And frankly, we live in a day and age, and we live in an area where most people have careers and not many people have true vocations. So, and then the fifth one, which is probably obvious, but I've forgotten it. Oh, yeah. See, this is embarrassing. Fifth one is religion. That's the fifth one. And he wouldn't mean a specific religion, but what he would mean is you need some overarching perspective on life that helps you through the ups and downs and gives you purpose and meaning. And again, that's verified by every person that's ever written on human well-being. We need something to carry us through the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of life, that gives us purpose and meaning, and without that, life just isn't worth a whole heck of a lot. So these would be his 5 categories. Interesting, isn't it? A little bit different. Now, here's the person who I think would be, so this was Carl Jung. How about, just for kicks, giggles and kicks, how about Jesus? What do you think Jesus would put on this list? I'm going to give you what I think. I've modified it because I got feedback from 8, and I think the feedback was good. I've been working on this for some time, and I keep modifying this list. I would be utterly fascinated, whatever you think of Jesus, right? I'd be utterly fascinated to know what you'd include on this list. Utterly fascinated. So, and I would love for you, again, whatever you think of Jesus in terms of divinity or whatever, most people agree he's one of the world's greatest teachers. What would have Jesus put on this list? So even if it's just from that perspective. And I'd love for you to do that as maybe couples or in a family or just on your own journaling. And if you're really bold, I would love for you to send that to me. I truly would love to see your lists. But so here's what I would do. Number one, I'd put truth. And this, well, we'll do that in a second. And again, you might disagree with me. But Jesus self-identifies, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Says there is no freedom without truth. And if you think about that, that only makes sense, because if truth is reality, then if we don't know the truth, we're pursuing delusion. And delusion is what's taking us away from reality, and that's in some way, shape, or form taking us away from health, vitality, and so on and so forth. I'm going to come back to this one because I'm not sure you're convinced on this one, so I'm going to come back to this one. 2 is where I think many of you would start, love, right? And you can certainly make a case for love. Jesus says the greatest commandment is this: you love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, love your neighbor. So you could certainly make this a case for this. 3, I'd put submission. And if submission is a word you don't really like, you could put humility there. And so, we're doers, right? I mean, we're people who take initiative. We've got drive. But Jesus wasn't so much a person who took initiative as he responded to what he understood was God's call. His life was more lived in response to who he understood God was and what God was asking him to do than taking bold initiative on his own. So who Jesus was and everything he did was defined, really, in submission to who God is. I remember the first time I came across this concept. And, people talk about reading things that change their lives. This literally changed my life. And this was Sam Keen. He wrote the book Fire in the Belly. An old book now, but boy, when I first read it, it just blew my mind. And he was talking about the measure of a man. And he said, and Sam Keen wasn't particularly a Christian, all right? He was sort of a broad-scale anthropologist, philosopher. And he said, down through the ages, the measure of a man has always been how much a man can conquer. Most obvious, how many women can a man conquer, right? I mean, that's kind of gross, but that's often how men have often measured themselves. How much industry can a man conquer? How many countries can a man conquer? I mean, the measures of man have always been how much can we conquer? And he said, but Jesus changed all that. Because Jesus said the measure of a man isn't how much he can conquer, but it's the measure of that to which a person submits. And I thought, holy cow, that's incredible. Because the old Bob Dylan song, we all got to serve something, we all submit to something. And what we submit to either makes less of us, it shrinks us down, right? It corrupts and pollutes us in a way, or it expands us, it grows our heart, it elevates, it lifts us. And he said, in Jesus, submitting to God is what opened his heart up and expanded his heart and made Jesus who Jesus was. Totally, completely redefined what it is to be a man and what it is to be human. Not what we can conquer, not what we can overcome, not the will to power, Friedrich Nietzsche, but that to which we can submit. Profound, profound, profound. And that takes great humility, right? And if you read leadership, what you will see in the last few years is humility is making a huge comeback. Humility is making a huge comeback, and for good reason. And then the fourth one that I'd put on there is I'd put on generosity. Generosity. And that's where my list stopped, but I was convinced to add service, because Jesus regarded himself as a servant. And I'd put generosity in there because everything Jesus said and done and generosity is not just money. right? It's generosity with who we are, giving who we are away. Jesus was always giving himself away rather than playing our cards close to our chest. Jesus was generous with his time. He allowed himself to be interrupted. He stopped what he was doing, always made time for people. And Jesus was generous with what he had. I mean, one of the greatest mysteries in the universe is how Jesus died with absolutely nothing, literally, and the church that purports to follow Jesus, well, has all this, right? How exactly does that happen? And it's something of a mystery. So Jesus lived this life of great generosity. So there's Jesus. There's my version of Jesus' list. Your list might be entirely different. It really might. I'd be fascinated to see what's on your list. And then the final one we can put up here would be John in today's gospel. And John gives us 4 categories. He gives us, and you know what they are because we just read them: light, life, truth, and grace. And it'd be interesting to do these as a continuum, like if we're looking at where we are and where we want to be. Light and darkness. There's a lot of darkness in the world right now, coming from a lot of different perspectives. And are you contributing to light or darkness? Right? Am I? What am I? Life. You know, death is rampant in the world. It's one of the things that's super interesting is how actors have all started smoking again, which is not by accident, right? I mean, there are people who pay a ton of money to make smoking cool, and what's smoking but the glorification of death? I mean, when you really come right down to it. So, life versus death, truth versus propaganda, whatever it is we're living right now, I'm not sure, and then grace versus outrage. You know, put some of these scales and what is it that we're promoting in the world, and the way we interact, the things the things that we put forward, that we share, or whatever. You know, how we come down on this. And what's really interesting to me, one thing that's interesting, are the things that all of these have in common. So, like mental health, which is the intellectual life, and truth, and so this is beholding reality, and truth carries over in all of these. And so, I want to spend just a moment on this one, all right? Because there are theories of population decline and growth. And I can't remember where I read this, can't remember who said it, so I apologize. But in one of the things that contributes, and this only makes common sense, is that one of the things that contributes to whether something thrives or goes extinct is the environment in which it lives. Makes sense, right? So if I have a pond, and I want to put brook trout in that pond, that water needs to be pure. But the second I start to introduce particulate matter and pollutants and so on and so forth, then the environment becomes toxic to a brook trout, and a brook trout can't survive in it anymore. So what a number of people are positing, and these aren't Christian people by any stretch of the imagination, but these are secular thinkers. But what they're saying is that we've come to live in a day and age where our environment contains pollutants that are toxic to truth. That our world has become so filled with pollutants that we now are hostile to truth. And I think that's true. I think it is exceedingly hard for people to get at the truth right now. And you can think of a couple things like, and this comes from Morgan Housel. This isn't from me. And again, Morgan Housel is not a Christian person. He says, if I can look at you and you say you're a Democrat or if you're a liberal or whatever, and I can guess your position on pretty much everything after that, you're not interested in the truth. You're just a mouthpiece for your party. Same thing, Republican, conservative. If I can guess everything you're going to say after that, you're not after the truth. You're just a mouthpiece for your party. If I can say that I'm an Episcopalian and you can guess everything I'm going to say, I'm not a free thinker in any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a spreader of propaganda. If I can, and it's amazing how well they can do that, look at your income, this is what he does, and if I can guess what you're doing with your money, in terms of what you're spending on your house, in terms of what you're spending on your vacation, in terms of what you're spending on this and that, then you're not a free thinker. You're just doing, you don't know anything about money. You're just doing what society tells you to do. Right? You're just living out the script that's given you rather than thinking what you really thrive. And so I mean, we live in a day and age that is exceedingly hostile to the truth. What's the one truth of our age? There is no objective truth, right? Except, if I say there is no objective truth, what's that? It's an objective truth. You get to hold your objective truth and see it as unassailable, but I don't get to hold mine, right? You're taking this out and saying, I deserve uncritical acceptance without anything else, but you're wrong. And I think the reason we don't want objective truth is because if there really is objective truth, then some people are right and some people are wrong. And if you're wrong, you're living a delusion. And you can make a case, and again, you can make this case through secular science. And you can make it really strongly and pretty much, well, I'm always welcome to entertain the conversation, and perhaps where I sit now, this looks fairly unassailable to me. At about the time that we left objective truth is about the time where mental health, mental illness skyrocketed. Because if you don't know what's true and what's not, then you just give you don't know what's true and you're just left in the morass. And B, you live a delusion, and delusions by nature take us away from reality. And that just becomes, we don't want to say something's right or wrong, but yet we would have if we were up on the roof, if I was up on the roof, and I said, I'm going to step off the roof, and you've heard me say this before, and I said, I believe if I step off that roof, I'm not going to fall. And you say, you do you, right? It's you got your own truth. It's important everybody to have their own truth, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, no. There's a right and a wrong. And if you just say that, you don't love me, because I'm going to hurt myself. But we've lost the capacity to do that. We've lost the capacity to do that. Now, it's super important that this gets paired with this. And I think part of the reason that people push back on truth is that truth gets divorced from love. The two need to be held together. And speaking the truth is one of the clearest ways that we express love. It's one of the most courageous ways we express love. So, interesting to see what's on here. Some things that might be different than what we'd normally put on there as we think of 2026, who we want to be and what we're going to camp out on, so we actually manifest and put flesh to it in our lives. What are you going to choose? I don't care if it's any of these lists. I mean, I do care. But what I want you to do is come up with a list and then head for it. Because if you don't, that I know is the only true recipe for regret. And you may not see it now, but you probably haven't lived as long as I have, and you haven't done as many funerals as I have. And so I've done thousands of funerals at this point, so I know what it looks like when people come to the end of their life. And I'll tell you just flat out, that is a recipe for true regret. Not knowing who you want to be, so that you never hit it. And not knowing where you want to go, so you just went anywhere. Come to the end. That's the only sure recipe that I know for deep and heartbreaking regret. Let me tell you one last story and we're done. Put this aside. This story happened when I was in Israel years ago. I think it was 2014. And I came to I think it's called the Church of the Nativity. A long time ago. I can't remember as well as I used to. It's where Jesus was purported to be born. And if you've been there, you know what it is. There's this big room, and you come down, you go down these sets of steps. It's a grotto. It's down in a cave, and then there's like a little silver star in the floor, and that's apparently where Jesus plopped out was born, like right there. So it's a place that's held of great holiness and solemnity. So I was there, and the line was like, it was at least a 2-hour line. It was a huge line. Went through the whole building. And we had a schedule for that day, and so there was just no time to wait in that line. My guide knew that I really wanted to see it, and so he said, listen, I want you to go to the front of the line. I said, what? He said, come with me. So he takes me right up to the front of the line. He says, stick your chest out. I said, what? He said, stick your chest out. I stuck my chest out. He said, put your chin up, like you're confident. I said, oh, okay. He said, stand in this line, and you just go right through. And then he leaves, and I'm sitting down like this, And I mean, no sooner does he leave than a guy who's across the room, and I mean the whole way across the room, and I make the mistake of making eye contact. He looks at me, and I kind of look up, and I'm not maybe so confident at that point, and he just knows I'm like a deer in the headlights. He knows, and he says, "You!" And it's like, oh my God, yes, you! Are you cutting in that line? And it's like, and then the guy of the group in front of me says, "Are you trying?" I mean, it's like, I all of a sudden I'm sort of almost scared for my life. And then the guy says under his breath, "Just apologize to me and ask me if you can come in the line." I said, "What?" He said, "Just apologize to me, ask him to come in the line." I said, I'm sorry for cutting the line. Can I cut?" He said, "Yeah, come here." And then he says to his group, he says, he's saying this so they can't hear them, because I guess maybe the guides have some of this arranged ahead of time. But he says this, and then he says loud to the group in here to sort of cover himself, "What country are you from?" And I said, "America." And he says, "America." And they all go, "Oh." I mean, like, yeah, we'd expect him to cut in line. I mean, it's like, and now I'm feeling really, really bad, right? I mean, it's like, but he gets me in there and he puts me down there. And so I get to the point where you kneel in front of this thing, and I'm the only one that's there, and I kneel, and I just feel so bad, right? I just feel, there's only one word that comes to my mind, and it's forgive. Like, just please forgive me. It was not a religious moment. I had no sense of anything special about it. I mean, it's just like all I had was my own massive failure. Why? Because I wasn't clear about who I wanted to be. I want to be a follower of Jesus, and that commits me to a certain character. And I betrayed Jesus to do this silly thing. It's not silly, but it's not as important as I betrayed it. I betrayed myself. I betrayed him. And then there's some things that you can only get by waiting in line. Part of the religious experience is investing the time, making the sacrifice, putting yourself out, doing the hard work to get to here. If you don't do that, this means nothing. There are some things that will only come. And this is truth. Right? This is truth. Here we go back to truth. This is why truth matters. There are some things that you can only get by doing certain things. If you don't do those things, you will never, ever, ever get this. And anybody who tells you different either wants something from you, is selling you something, or is lying to you. So as you think about all that, remember that. It's important to clarify what you want on that list and who you want to be. Because nothing else is going to matter much if you're not clear about that. And second, there are some things that only come if you're willing to make the sacrifice, put in the effort, put in the time, and metaphorically, wait in line. Make sense? Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.